I think ideally, literature gives people a view to something better, to see the potentiality of their existence.
Welcome to Tales with the Sales, where we discuss stories that matter because you are living one. I'm your host, Jane DeSales. I'm a writer, poet, and storyteller. It is my pleasure to introduce you to authors as we explore how fiction impacts our lives and culture. My guest today is Jane Lebak. Jane published The Guardian under the name Jane Hamilton in 1994 when she was still in graduate school. Since then, she's gotten married, raised 4 children, and published a few dozen novels under both her own name and a pen name, as well as many short stories, poems, and essays. She has degrees in English and Religious Studies from Cornell University and a master's in English from SUNY Brockport. She will talk your ear off about knitting socks, and she's currently training for her 2nd marathon. In this episode, we discuss her work Perdition's Heirs, a spiritual warfare fantasy available on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. Jane, thanks so much for joining us. It's the Two Jane Show today, and I would love to hear what you've brought to read for us.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking it's like the opening of a joke, two Janes met on a podcast. And okay. So this is from the Siberiad. It's by Stanislav Lem. It's from the first Sally. In this story, up to this point, there are 2 inventors. They're both robots. There's Trull and there's Clapaucius. Trull has been working on a robotic bard. Clapaucius is his rival, and therefore he's trying to kind of denigrate what Trull has created, but he's about to fail. "Just a minute," said Clapaucius, annoyed. He was trying to think of a request as difficult as possible, aware that any argument on the quality of the verse the machine might be able to produce would be hard, if not impossible, to settle either way. Suddenly he brightened and said, "Have it compose a poem about a haircut, but lofty, noble, tragic, timeless, full of love, treachery, retribution, quiet heroism in the face of certain doom. 6 lines, cleverly rhymed, and every word beginning with the letter S." "And why not throw in a full exposition of the general theory of nonlinear automata while you're at it?" growled Trorl. "You can't give it such idiotic—" But he didn't finish. A melodious voice filled the hall with the following: "Seduced, Shaggy Samson snored." She scissored short. "Sorely shorn, soon shackled slave, Samson sighed, silently scheming, sightlessly seeking some savage, spectacular suicide." "Well, what do you say to that?" said Trull, his arms folded proudly. But Clapaucius was already shouting, "Now all in G, a sonnet, trochaic hexameter, about an old cyclotron who kept 16 artificial mistresses, blue and radioactive, had 4 wings, 3 purple pavilions, 2 lacquered chests, each containing exactly 1,000 medallions bearing the likeness of Tsar Murdakog the Headless. Grinding gleeful gears, Gerontogyron grabbed, giggling Gynacobalt 60 golems began the machine, but Trull leaped to the console, shut off the power, and turned, defending the machine with his body. My 13-year-old son, has memorized that poem, and every so often just trots it out.
You have just hit on like a nerdy gold mine. This is amazing.
The whole book is amazing. I love this book. So my father introduced me to this book, The Siberiad, although it was a different edition of it, when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old. And I didn't understand what I was reading at that point in time. I just liked the funny parts. Like the very first story, Trull invents a robot that is an idiot. Like it insists that 2 + 2 is 7. And then the more that he kicks it and he gets mad at it, it gets to be like a really outraged idiot, and it ends up like chasing them and bringing down a mountain on top of its head. And, he's like, "You have offended me for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 7th times," and it's hilarious. The whole story. And there are so many stories in this book, and they're all so different. He predicted in one of the stories in this book, he predicted Twitter. He ends up with this, I know, and this was written in, I think, the 60s. They're trying to escape from this pirate And
Wait. So let me
yes,
get this right. So he wrote about
yes.
an idiot and he wrote about Twitter. So it's sounding like there's some connection here. Go on.
There are there are like oh man, how many stories are in this? I don't even know. I think there's like 17 stories in the work. So they're trying to escape from this pirate, and they try to tempt the pirate by telling him that they can give him a machine that will give him all the knowledge in the universe, and he wants this because he figures he can mine it for important stuff. And it does give him all the information. He's got to keep his eyes glued to this little screen where it keeps giving him facts. But the facts are all just these little tidbits of things, and they just keep coming and coming in this endless stream. And so it's, the number of laces on the shoes of this princess in this other galaxy, and that's like right up next to three things that you can do with uranium, which is right next to so all of these things, and they're not sorted. So he just keeps his eyes glued to it because of fear of missing out, and eventually they were able to escape because he just never looks away from it. So
What?
I know, right? It was so good. I mean, it was prescient, honestly. So and I love these stories. So and that's why I picked this. I was actually looking for a section out of Howl's Moving Castle
Ooh,
and
uh-huh.
I'm standing in front of my ginormous bookshelves, and I suddenly see the Siberia, and I said, "Oh, wait a minute. This is the book. This is the book to read from." So
That is so awesome.
yeah,
That
this story is good.
so is it a collection of short stories?
This one's a collection of short stories. They were all written about these two inventors. So Stanislaw Lem was writing in Polish, which, by the way, can you imagine being the translator who got hit with that poem? Okay. Anyway.
Oh my word.
Yes. So he was writing in Polish. He was writing behind the Iron Curtain. Okay. Now, if you want to criticize, the Soviets, and you're writing behind the Iron Curtain, and you write a story criticizing the Soviets, that's going to be the last story you've ever written, right? You
Or the
don't
last
want
one
to,
you've written outside of a gulag.
where or even in the gulag, I'm pretty sure they don't hear from you again. So my father pointed out to me, and my father was really influential in the way that I began to approach literature. What Lem does is he makes it look like just basically low grade science fiction. He makes his stories look like pulp science fiction. But in actuality, every one of these stories has something embedded in the background that is really like a critique of the society he's living in and the repressive atmosphere. He's working that in there without, I mean, and he could just deny it. If you say, no, it's just a poem about a robotic bard. What are you talking about? It's just a poem about, a robotic idiot machine that's 8 stories tall and insists that 2 plus 2 is 7. I'm certainly not critiquing the Soviet Union, but he pointed out to me that you've got layers that you can read too. So you can read just at the story layer, but then you could read it like, the social layer, and then there's like the symbolic layer, and you can go deeper and deeper. And that really changed the way that I approached literature, because I was like, you don't want to have a lot of things that are considered literary right now. They avoid the story and the character level in order to go right for the thematic level. But you don't need to do that. People will get your theme just as well, even if you're telling a story that looks on the surface like it's pulp fiction, that doesn't mean anything. Oh, but they're going to get it. They will keep chewing over it. So that's one of the reasons that I was inspired by the Siberiad, and why it's one of my perennials that I keep going back to.
I'm going to need to get a copy because that just blew me away. And obviously I haven't read it, and I would love
Yeah.
to read it for the point of it being a social commentary
Mhm.
on the Soviet regime and things
Yeah.
like that. I know I've got Solzhenitsyn in my to be read pile right now. Let's be honest that sometimes when you can handle that social commentary through something humorous, I mean, humor takes intellect.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Because you have to be able to turn things on their head. You can't have to be able to look at something and see how it could be and how it is, and kind of juxtapose those two and do it in a surprising way. So yeah, so this engages you. It's not just funny. It's also it's also kind of an intellectually funny, but then also at the same time you're like, oh. He has another story which I couldn't read for you because getting enough of it would have taken far too long. But it's like it's the Steely Pips. The whole thing internally rhymes, and the entire story, and it's awesome. But they end up, the Steely Pips are this little, they seem to be little robots that they have a perfectly happy society where they're all part of a piece, right? They all contribute, they all do everything they want, and then this big robot comes and sits there, and it threatens them, and they don't know what to do about it. So Troll comes, and the whole thing is very cleverly rhymed. It has a really nice meter and everything. And then Troll, they ask him for help. When he finally comes, he sets up an office with a coffee maker and a filing cabinet. And they're like, "What are you doing?" So when the Steely Pips are narrating, "Not far from here, by a white sun, behind a green star, lived the Steely Pips, illustrious, industrious. They hadn't a care, no spats in their vats, no rules, no schools, no gloom." That's how the story's written. When Trull actually engages the creature that's threatening the Steely Pips, it goes to, "Notice is hereby given that in RE hindrance of tenant as stated under revision stat C 117 parentheses E-2 KKP 4 of the CTSP communication code." And he just keeps going from there. And at the end of it, like they keep sending letters back and forth. And finally he sends something that says, it says, "The tenant may not appeal this ruling," and it leaves. And then he takes down the whole apparatus, and they're like, "Why are you doing that?" He says, "I don't want it to destroy you. It was a big machine that begins with a big B. And as the cosmos is the cosmos, no one's licked it yet." So it's a bureaucracy. He destroys
Ooh.
it, and it's like, but he never says what he's doing. He doesn't, it can look like Pulp Fiction, and you'd have to read pretty far in the book to pick this up. So I just find Lem very clever. Sorry, I could talk about him all day. I could also talk about Diana Wynne Jones all day, but this is the book that I picked, so that's what you're stuck with.
Well, and I love that you mentioned Howl's Moving Castle too. I haven't read the book, but
Oh, read
obviously
the book.
with my cat named Soot Gremlin sitting behind me, we're friends of Miyazaki in this house.
See, the movie disappointed me because he took a lot of liberties with it. It practically was like a different story. I've read Howl's Moving Castle at least 6 times, and
Oh
I
wow.
keep finding new stuff in it. And just the way that Diana Wynne Jones lays out in the early pages all of the themes and all of the secrets that are going to be blown open later on, except that Sophie doesn't know any of them, and she's just living her life. And so, like the second or third, fourth time going through, I'm like, "Oh, she did really well with this." She's hiding these things. Sophie's assumptions are feeding everything that's happening around her, and so she's unaware of her own magic, but it's definitely at work. And so
Mm.
it's just such a good story, and the way that it resolves in the end, and her interactions with Calcifer, and of course Howl is hilariously funny in the book. He's so melodramatic and so over the top. He gets a cold, "I'm dying up here." It's just such a good book. It's definitely one of my favorites, and also was given to me by my father when I was about 12 years old.
So it sounds like he was pretty impactful as
Yeah.
far as your love of literature.
Yeah, he was. I didn't like to read at all, and then one day I discovered the Black Stallion books, and then my parents were divorced, so he would pick us up, 2, 3 times a week, and we would go places. But so many times he would like have a paper bag in the front seat of the car from Walden Books, and he would give me one of the Black Stallion books, and they would be there. So that was always cool. And then I would, again, those ones I read like a million times.
My aunt introduced me to Nancy Drew in the
Okay.
2nd grade,
And
and
you never run out of those books. There's there's quite a few of those.
I still have all my Nancy Drews and I have all my Trixie Beldens. I'm going to hang on to those for my girls. They're not quite there for reading independently, those books, although we read pretty challenging books to them. Like we do read alouds as a family.
Yeah.
My girls have already heard The Hobbit and all of the Lord of the Rings and all of the Borrowers and all the Little House books. And now we just started Anne of Green Gables. So
that's a good one.
Yeah, and I never read it as a kid.
Oh.
So it's all like this huge surprise to me. So I'm really enjoying it. But it's incredible how much impact people can have just planting the seed of loving stories.
Yeah.
How significant, in light of like what you're talking about, this commentary on the Soviet regime and things like that, how significant do you think the arts are in combating totalitarianism?
I'm not a political writer myself because I would actually prefer to stay out of it. I think ideally literature gives people a view to something better, to see the potentiality of their existence. Because of that, like if you can write about freedom to people who do not feel free, then it gives them some hope, and it gives them something to strive for, even if you're not saying, go ahead and do this. That's actually one of the issues I find with the current crop of literary fiction. When you have fiction that, in the literary genre, I'm not talking about great literature of the past. I'm talking about, nowadays, when you have the books with the really long titles, and everything is dismal. A lot of it is hopeless. There's a distinct lack of belief in the inherent goodness of human beings in these stories, and I feel like that kind of undercuts any desire for change. But if you can show people a world where the thing that they don't have is attainable, then it might inspire them to attain it, even if you're not actively saying, go do likewise. People will say, well, why can't I have that? It can also, you also have books that serve as warnings, A Canticle for Leibowitz is showing, is definitely there to serve as a warning. I don't know that helps as much, but those are the ones that people tend to think of as the political activist type things, the 1984 and Animal Farm, where they're just basically out there to tell people this is where we're going and it's terrible. I think that there's the more subtle undercurrent, when you can show people hope, it gives them something to work for, and it gives them stories, and it gives them someone to root for, and maybe they find inspiration in that. I have been fortunate enough not to live under totalitarianism, so this is just someone talking in a in a second floor bedroom on wall to wall carpet in a heated house. So
From what you're saying, it seems to me that some of the freedom is internal, that some of the freedom isn't this externality. It isn't even necessarily political, but it's your own philosophy of hope.
I think the only thing that keeps us going sometimes is hope, right? That something will get better. You've got, even if it doesn't get better, you can get through it. We need that. I think that's something that's that we all cling to that. And, so there's spiritual hope. And then there's also just emotional hope, where you just get up again and do it again. You get knocked down, you get up. You're thrown to the ground, everything got ruined. You can still start over, And I've been in positions where I didn't want to start over, but you just get up and do it again. By the way, if you want some spiritual advice, this is it. The time to pray for perseverance is before you need it. I tell this to my religious education students, and or I told it to my religious education students. I'm not teaching anymore, but that there was a point in my life where I remember I was praying the St. Michael chaplet, and I got to the archangels, where it says, you're praying for perseverance and faith and all good works. And I was like, and I don't want to do anything. And then I thought, I have prayed this prayer every day for how long? I've already prayed for it. I don't need to mean it right now. It was already here. So, God can honor all those other ones. And, because right now I wouldn't have had at that moment, I was thinking I wouldn't have had the desire to start praying for perseverance, but I'd already been praying for it. So there I was, and I could keep going. Start the ball rolling down the hill before you need it. Anyway, sorry. I'm full of ridiculous tidbits like that.
That's my life and my brain. No need to apologize whatsoever. Well, and the thing, tying it back to the thing of hope, is if a book can inspire hope and get that internal hope that can then be externalized out in society, could the reverse also occur? And why those hopeful stories are still important even in our culture, that if we internalize stories of hopelessness, can we not almost suffer from a self-imposed totalitarianism? That that we can be imprisoned in a completely free place.
Right. You're sitting in a cage with the doors wide open and you refuse to leave. I encountered a lot of stories like that in my in college and my graduate program in literature. Just lots and lots of stories where there was just why are these characters even trying? The characters themselves were hopeless. They were shallow vapid people engaged in shallow vapid struggles. And then at the end of the story, they, had gotten what they wanted and discovered it wasn't what they wanted, but they were still going to keep plugging away at it. And I'm like, well, okay, why am I reading this? Why did I spend this time doing this? I think that would also be mutually reinforcing. And yeah, that's not what I don't think that's literature at its best. I think we can, I mean, I'm sure stories like that have a place, but a steady diet of them is probably not really good for one's psyche, I would imagine. After a while, you need some sunlight.
Well, and I think that you can, I mean, I'm definitely not one who's afraid of exploring dark, hard situations. Like A
Oh yeah.
Canticle for Leibowitz is one of
Mhm.
the finest
Yes.
books I've ever read. And I'm like,
Mhm.
this is science fiction gold, but
Mhm.
more than that. Like, I think
It's
everybody should read it.
It's dark, but is it hopeless? I don't think so. At the
No,
end, they're
it's not
leaving.
hopeless.
They shake the dust off their feet and they go, and you know that they're going to be carrying the truth out to other places. Yes, the characters, many of them met really horrific ends during that story, but on the other hand, you still got a sense of the human spirit as something worth preserving, and
Hmm.
people as creatures worth loving.
Well, and
And
I oppose that with, like, I really like Neville Shute's novels,
mhm.
but I read one called On the Beach. And in the end of it, everybody either euthanizes themselves or someone else because of a nuclear apocalypse, that it was hopeless.
Yeah.
And I was so upset because Neville Shute's books, even if they deal with hard things like war or
Mhm.
suicide or things like that, that they still have this, burgeoning hope even in the darkness. But On the Beach, it was the flip side of A
Mhm.
Canticle for Leibowitz. And I made a rant on it. And I actually said, this feels more like an apologia for euthanasia than it does
Mhm.
an anti-nuclear war
Right.
story.
Mhm.
And I think that when you can show the story with hope, I don't like false optimism because people can pick up on that in a
Well, yeah.
heartbeat.
Mhm.
But when you, like you said, the perseverance of the human spirit, that there are good things that are worth preserving, that we are creative,
Mhm.
that we are, that there's ingenuity in us, even though we also use our ingenuity to do stupid things.
Right.
Um, there's just so much there. Oh, I love books. I love books. But you were also mentioning a chaplet that you were praying to Saint Michael the Archangel. And
Yes.
I just finished your book,
Okay.
Perdition's Heir,
Mhm.
which you write about angels.
Yes.
So
So
tell us a little bit about how you came up with this idea of making a military drama, except it's with angels.
all right, so 9 days after my 16th birthday, this is a long story, I finally picked up a book that when a friend of the family had given me, and he kept bugging me to read it. It was St. Michael and the Angels. It's a book by Tan. It is still in print, and I finally picked it up, and I'm like, "I'm going to read this just so that he gets off my back." Okay. So I brought it. I used to read on the subway going to school and back again. So the morning I would do the rosary, and on the way home I would read. Okay. So, and I, was trudging through it. The book is actually supposed to be 30 days of devotions. And I'm like, well, it's the only book I have with me right now. So I just started plugging through it. Okay. Like about the third day of reading this book, it's not very long, it was like the sky opened up and I just understood that there was this whole other world that I couldn't see, and how awesome it was and how amazing. And I was absolutely taken. And you know how, like, when you are absolutely gripped by something, the world around you sort of disappears? And do you know
Mhm.
how dangerous that is on the subway when you don't know where you are? Okay.
Yes, I do. I do.
Okay. So I sort of came to myself, and I was sitting on a bench at the Bowling Green station, which is not any place that I would normally have gotten off the train. And I look around and everyone is out of the train. The whole train is empty because I guess they had put it out of service. And I'm just sitting there on a bench, which means that at some point or another, they stopped the train, they put it out of service, they told us all to get off the train. I got up and walked onto the platform and found a seat and continued reading without registering that any of that happened. Okay, that's how taken I was by the whole thing. So anyway, after I finished reading the book, I thanked God for my guardian angel. I started talking to him, and I never stopped. And I feel like I owe that angel a drink, because I talked a lot, as you can imagine. So anyway, that was when I was 16 years old. Right after that, I did start writing stories about angels because I was just so absolutely enthralled by everything. I started reading any book I could find that might have angels in it, because like the Tan catalog came to my house every month, and I would look through it for books with angels, so Pascal Parente's Beyond Space. But I also read a book that was 3 inches thick about purgatory, because I figured, well, angels will be in that one too, right? So any book I could find that had, that was Catholic and that had angels in it, because I also knew you didn't want to go for like the new age weird ones, that I wanted to avoid that. A lot of these stories had their initial genesis back then and have just been getting published more recently. For this one, I hadn't written an angel book in a long time, and I was like, okay, so what are we going to write about? I had written about special ops, very sort of glancingly, in one of the other books. And I thought, well, they sound like they'd be fun to write about. Let's do like a special op. But what kind of special ops would special ops do? And then I remembered that in Sacred Cups, the demon Belior is bragging that he about an old man that he owned. The old man made an agreement with him, and he always made sure that it rained on the man's farm so that the guy could survive. And after he died, Belior says, I made sure it didn't rain on his farm for 6 years until his grandkids remembered granddad's weird old practices, and now I own a family. And that's just a throwaway line in Sacred Cups. But I was remembering that, and I said, okay, what if we really went into intergenerational evil? Like, what if they really, let's look at what these demons can really do with that. And special ops is going to try and start to get in and short circuit this. So that's Perdition's Heirs, is that a man has died after a lifelong, basically, or like 65-year pact with a demon. He dies. He's got 3 grandchildren who are his heirs. His original contract passes down to the 3rd or 4th generation. These guys now, I guess, are generation 2, because his children have died, and now these are the grandchildren. And so this can now transfer to them. Special Ops needs to prevent these 3 from continuing the pact. One of them is the CEO to the Fortune 500 corporation that Linus Ellington had started. One of them is a politician. He's a congressman. One of them is an upcoming actor. And so these are the 3 of them. There are 2 demons who are spearheading this. It's a seraph and cherub pair who are basically manipulating the toxic family dynamics in order to get what they want. And then you have the special ops team. It's headed up by Cosmiel. He's the head of the Choir of Powers, but he's burnt out, and he does not realize it. He is so burnt out, feeling like all of their cases are hopeless. His second in command is Sophiel, and Sophiel is awesome. I love him. He invents anything. Like, if you give him an impossible task, he describes his own job as, I stand around waiting for Cosmiel to ask me to do the impossible, and then I do it. There's Ariel, who's the head of their intergenerational evil. She's their expert in interrupting that. And then there's the 3 guardian angels of the 3 humans. And that's your cast of characters there. So
I found it really interesting, and you kind of touched on it. You said the toxic family dynamic. I really liked the fact that you point out that even spiritual warfare doesn't exist strictly in a spiritual realm. There's the social experience, there's the psychological experience, there's physical manifestations of it. It's almost like we're integrated beings.
Well, yeah, almost, right? Body and soul and spirit and all that. And I'd read a lot about toxic family dynamics and stuff, and so it made sense that Linus was pre-programming the grandchildren to accept the bond, but he himself is in a toxic relationship with the demons, and so he's a toxic person himself, so he's very jealous. And so you've got all of these things, the push-pull. You've got the golden child and the scapegoat dynamic going on with the kids, and then there's Linus's wife, who he ignored and had effectively emotionally discarded her, who turns out to have had a lot more power than any of them anticipated. We come to our relationship with God with the baggage of our past, of our upbringing, of our core beliefs, of the things we don't know we believe, of the things that have just been set up as so normal to us that we never questioned them. And in our own spiritual lives, then God sets about dismantling all of these things, like the false beliefs, the lie that we believe, wholeheartedly, even though we don't know it's a lie. We believe these things like I'm only I'm only worthwhile to God if I can produce things for Him, or God will only love me if I am perfect. And we have we've inculcated these from our own relationship with our own parents, and God then slowly sets about dismantling them for us. Like, I want to take this chain off of you. So so God will put us in a situation where He can take the chain off of us, or we can cling to that chain. And God loves us anyway, but it's still there and holding us back. And so Cosmiel is, of course, dealing with a very big chain in there because he feels like all the failures that he's had in this incredibly difficult job have diminished his value in the eyes of God, and also that the fact that he's using a lot of demonic techniques in order to undermine the demonic techniques that their enemies are using, he feels has actually sullied him in God's eyes, even though that's not how God feels about him.
It deals with this whole thing of, and especially in our culture, that it's a big question mark of whether we understand what love is at
Yeah.
all. And if we can't understand it from a human perspective, how much more challenging will it be to understand from a cosmic perspective?
Yeah, because the humans, like Anna, doesn't understand love at all. Like, she has love, or she had love in her ex-husband, and just discarded it because it didn't take the form she expected it to. She expected love to be borderline abusive. And when he loved her wholeheartedly, she couldn't accept it. There's so much of that going on. Cosmiel does not realize that how much his underlings respect and love him. He always feels like he's let them down. There's Jazaria, who loves his charge Forrest, when he's at the very end, and so, what are you going to do? You only have a half hour left with him. What are you going to do? And he says, I can love him for 1/2 hour more. I can love him. And at the end, that's all that's all that's left. And then, is that enough? Will people accept that, when you're face to face with God and I can love him is all that's left? Are you going to accept that? Or are you going to accept that God loves you?
Yeah, it seems like that's really the pivot point, is our understanding of love.
But that wouldn't have said that this was a love story at all, because you've got demons and people going to hell and things like that. I mean, and there is no romance in it. Obviously, it's all like agape love, and philos love, but it's not. There's no erotic or romantic love in any of this. You've got the way the children love their mother, the way that Anna loves her brothers. It's the way that the special ops team loves each other. And then, of course, there's the way that God loves them all. When Anna is standing there in her room she has lost everything, and she says, Jesus Christ, Son of God, do you love me? And God's like, do you really want the answer to that? So
well, that's the question. Are we prepared to accept the answer to that?
And God wouldn't. That was the thing. When I went through it, I realized afterwards that God is actually asking for her consent. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's what God does. He could flood us. He could overwhelm us, and he doesn't. He waits for our consent. He waits for us to consent to him, basically. He'll court us. You get that whole Hound of Heaven thing going on sometimes. He'll court us, but really he waits for our consent before he'll really open the floodgates with us. So
I know it would be hard to pinpoint, or it is for me, but what exactly would you call the genre of your Archangel books?
This one's spiritual warfare fantasy. That's how I would put it. It's very, talk about a niche subgenre. But it's spiritual warfare fantasy, and I would say also, The Wrong Enemy falls into that. So does most of the series does. Ironically, the first 2 books in the series feel more to me like women's fiction, even though there really aren't any women in the first book at all. But the rest of the books in the series, I think, fall into the spiritual warfare zone. There's fighting going on. My husband read Shattered Walls, and he called it Superheroes in Heaven. because of the way that they all have their own little powers, and they have their skills and stuff. And this book doesn't deal so much with the seven archangels of the presence, but four of the others do delve very deeply into the archangels of the presence. You've got Gabriel, Raphael, Michael, and then also I rounded out to seven with Uriel, Remiel, Saraquiel, and Raguel. Those are your core characters. And for An Arrow in Flight, for Sacred Cups, Shattered Walls, and Annihilation. Shattered Walls is basically just a romp, because Remiel goes down into hell because she and Zadkiel go down into hell. She's heard that Satan is creating a secret weapon, so she wants to find out what it was. They find it. She accidentally sets it off, and and she and Zadkiel end up trapped on Earth in human bodies, along with one demon who is very angry about this, does not like this, and thinks they are his only chance at getting back to where he ought to be. So that one's just a romp. I had so much fun writing that story. That one, again, spiritual warfare though, because it's angels battling demons, and you know frequently demons battling demons too, because they're not really all on the same side.
They're not. They're all on their own
Yeah.
side. Yeah, because that jealousy and that hatred, that's all that it could breed. What would you hope that your readers take away from your books?
That angels are awesome, and that they're there, that the spiritual realm is interacting with our realm very closely, and we're blinded to it. We don't see this. It's very hard for us to know what's going on. I would say in many cases it's impossible. Like, you can't we have guardian angels. They love us a lot. They're working so hard to keep us free to make the decision and to embrace God and to accept grace. And we should be aware that there are also enemies that don't want us to do these things, and that there's another world that's interacting with ours. I mean, we can see this in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, where you have events on earth that are linked to the liturgy that's taking place in heaven at the same time. So you have, the angels in heaven, they pray, then the humans pray after the angels, and then we've got things happening on earth in response to the prayers of the saints, and in response to the prayers of the angels, and then angels are sent out to do things, and then again the people, the saints in heaven see what's going on again, and it's all interacted. It's like this very seamless thing. To us, it feels like we're very bifurcated, but from the other side, they're not seeing it that way at all. And so I would say, to take away from all these stories, that there are angels around, that they are real, that they are individuals, that they have personalities, that they have strengths, that they want you in heaven more than you can possibly want it for yourself, that God loves you, and that this is one of the gifts that he's given us to keep us safe. That there are demons out there who would not hesitate to do anything to hurt us. And it's God's protection of us, and frequently it does take angelic form when we're being protected. So that's what I would say I'd like people to take out of it. I know people who have, begun devotion to their own guardian angels after reading stories of these. At least they told me they did. That's always nice.
We've discussed that you're covering this niche of kind of spiritual warfare fantasy. And I attended a great talk that you did about writing fiction that's not preachy. When you're writing a spiritual warfare fantasy, how do you accomplish that without being preachy?
That's a good question.
Because you do. I want to know how.
Well, because the spiritual truths that are showing up in the book are happening because they fit into the story. They're seamless with it. It's so I never started any of these books with the idea that I'm going to teach people to be to forgive themselves, or I'm going to teach someone to that communication is important in relationships, or
no,
I don't start with that. That's not, but some of these themes show up, and they come up after, like they sort of burgeon up, but really I'm more interested in, how is this character going to get out of this situation he's put himself into? That's where I'm trying to keep my focus the whole time. And I feel like one of the things about preachy fiction is, first, it stops the story, and secondly, it tends to supplant the actual progress of the story, because I need to, if I wanted to write a book specifically to preach that you must accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, then that means that I need to have a scene where this happens, and I need to treat the reader kind of like an idiot, in that I have to assume the reader needs to be told that he should, have a relationship with God. And all of that would tend to, I think, diminish the story itself. Well, I'm not a preacher. I feel like I have a story to tell, and people may get things out of the story. I feel like, for example, I said I want people to take away from the story that there are angels out there, and that it would be good to be more aware of them. Okay. But at no point, did I stop the story and have Jazaria say, it would be really good if Anna would know that she has a guardian angel who loves her, and have another angel come along and say, yes, if only she would say the guardian angel prayer to you every morning. That's not going, that would
Mm-hmm.
just sort of stop it. But instead, we can see what her life is like, because she is very focused on the here and now, and doesn't believe that there's a spiritual realm at all, until it's basically hitting her in the face with the fact that there are demons and they want her soul, and they can give her everything. It's not even till the end that she suddenly realizes, well, maybe I do have a guardian angel. Like, why would an angel, you know, it makes sense. She thinks suddenly, yeah, I guess there would be, if demons paid attention to me, maybe there's an angel who would pay attention to me too. I that last scene, by the way, I did that so that, because I wanted to give her guardian angel a little gift, because I put him through so much in the course of the story. I needed to give him something to make it up to him.
He did have a
He
rough
had a
go, I
really
have
rough
to
go.
say. So, and then the other question about story building I wanted to ask you was, like, when you talk about Lem's book and you talk about the different
Yeah.
layers, like, how do you build layers into your
They come.
stories?
I don't. They just sort of show up. That I really don't know how that happens. I have gotten to the end of two of these books. Not one of them was an angel book. One was the Father J book, where I got to the end of the story and I couldn't finish it. Like, literally the last chapter, I had one, maybe 2 pages left to write, and I couldn't finish it. And I said, what is going on? Like, it was like there was a creative wall, and I knew what sort of needed to happen, and I couldn't make it happen. And, put the book away and walk away from it for a while. And so in the case of the Father J story, I realized that I didn't know what the book was about. Like, I thought
Mm.
that the book was about a disabled priest who was taking homeless kids in the rectory and needed to reconcile with his brother. That's what I, in my ignorance, thought the book was about. Okay. It turns out that the book was about me being a failed writer. And I didn't know this at the time. Right? But at the time, I'd had my first baby, and we were in discussions about, having a second baby. And I knew that the first baby, he was a very high need baby. And I didn't have the mental wherewithal to keep writing. And I said to myself, and in the back of my mind, I realized that I was accepting that I was never going to write again if I had another baby that was equally high needs. I didn't realize he was a high need baby. I just thought that all babies were like that. And I knew that in order to be the mother my kids needed, I couldn't possibly be expected to still write, because, so Father Jay, who was the disabled priest, what represented the new life that I was going to have to be in. Jay gave up all of his dreams in order to enter the priesthood. Jay's brother, who's estranged from him, represented the old life, because he never really gave
Mm.
up on the old person. He was he felt betrayed by Jay leaving him. And so here I am on the last pages of the book, and I can't reconcile this. The book won't end because I can't reconcile what I'm still feeling in myself, which is that Jay, like, I'm going to be losing everything if we, have a baby, right? And so this is all, like, unconscious. And when I finally realized it, I said, oh. And so I write the final scene, and in that scene, Kevin says to Jay, he says to Father Jay, shouldn't you bless me or something? And Jay says, no, I want you to bless me. And he sits down and puts Kevin's hands on his head. And Kevin's like, Kevin, who's an atheist, says, I don't even know how to do this. And he says, well, usually I just say something like, I bless you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And Kevin says, well, I can do that. And he blesses him. And that was basically giving me permission to move forward and have the baby that we felt that God was calling us to have. That was nowhere. I'd never planned that. I didn't plan that at all. That was my unconscious packing things into the story and, making it just basically feeding in the questions that were just throbbing in the back of my head that I wasn't even aware of. And that's happened to me a few times. And so where I didn't know what the story was about until I was nearly done with writing the story. And I'm like, oh, is that what it was about? Oh, it's about, this other thing. And, like here all along, I thought it was about the plot, and it turns out it was about something completely different. So, and it sounds weird to say that a book about a priest and his estranged brother is actually a story about motherhood, but, there you have it. So.
Well, and it shows that in a little way that God has his way with our families, huh?
Yeah, no, he absolutely. And I think he works, with me at least, I think that the Holy Spirit likes to engage with me that way, that we can make something together, that
What?
we can make something together, that the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit created, God created the universe, right? It doesn't mean he's done creating, right? And so he can kind of like work with me and we can create something, and it doesn't have to be good. It just has to be ours, it has to be mine. It has to be, and God can kind of spin it up a bit and, have fun with it. Right. And if God can't have fun with us, then why would he have made us, so we can play.
Fun is part
Right.
of
And
love.
let's play together. Let's, when we create stories, when we enjoy stories, when we read stories, God's probably like playing with us, like you read to your kids. Right. God can enjoy it when we read a story too, so.
That's something that I was actually kind of thinking about today, is the relationship between the words recreation and recreation. And the fact that playfulness, that fun, that resting in joy is recreation, is recreating a part of us and giving us a fresh start.
Yeah.
So what are you working on right now?
That's a good question. So right now I'm kind of in a lull at the moment. So I have a story. It is also spiritual warfare fantasy, but it is from the point of view of a 13-year-old boy. I have a story that I'm going to be cleaning up and publishing later this year. I am. I have a pen name who writes sweet romances. I'm also writing a sweet romance for that pen name because that one, I'm part of a multi-author series, and that book has to come out on June 17th. So I really need to finish that. So that's my current thing, or those two, is I'm going to have to get the spiritual warfare book is called 1,000 Generations, and it's about a 13-year-old boy. His father's a pastor, and his uncle dies in what looks an awful lot like a ritual to summon a demon, and his cousin is left mute afterwards. So despite the fact that everyone tells Gage not to get involved with this, he does. He wakes up in the middle of the night and feels called to leave the house, and goes outside, and he finds these two jinn, which he'd never even heard of before.
Ooh.
They are outside in the snow, pulling up one of the threads that God uses to hold the world together. And they give him a piece of it. He's not supposed to be able to see the jinn. He's not supposed to be able to see them at all. And they're very surprised that he can, but they give him a piece of the thread, and they tell him, well, you should use that. And he's like, what is it? What do I even do with this? And oh, it's for protection. And they leave. Well, he has no idea what to do with this, but because he now has this, he figures he ought to use it. So he starts trying to figure out, and of course gets engaged with the whole spiritual warfare, the fact that his his cousin's been struck mute, his uncle is dead, his father, is trying to protect him. So, and it turns out that there is a generational curse on that family as well, or it might be a generational blessing. It's hard to tell. So,
oh boy,
yeah. So there's that one. There are angels in that story, but again, they're not the point of it all. They do show up and basically say to Gage things like, "Please stop doing this." So. But he's a 13-year-old boy, so he doesn't really listen. And that'll be out later this year. Getting a cover. We're in process making the cover, and after that, I just need to get it copy edited, and then I think it's ready to go.
Very exciting. And if people want to find updates on all of this work, where would they find that?
I don't really do my social media that much, but
good for you.
No, well, it just as like my personal social media, yes, but I have a Facebook page where I do I update there, and I will also post my my mailing list to the Facebook page, so you can read the mailing list without getting email, basically, because you don't want to if you don't want to be hassled with having email in your inbox. But once a week, I do Thursdays with Jane. Where I save something, like I share some sort of weird story about my weird existence. Last time it was how I failed at making a scarf for Lent, and and, and I just so I do like one weird tidbit about my life plus a recommendation. But if I have more books and stuff coming up, obviously I'll mention them in the mailing list as well.
All right, great. Well, I think it's time for us to dig a little deeper with my 100 over-caffeinated questions in the rando round.
Okay.
What do you think? So, I have a feeling that you probably know what these things are. My percentile dice.
Yes. Okay.
And so would you like pink with mermaid sparkles or tie-dye?
Tie-dye, please.
All right. I love tie-dye. It's very cheerful.
I just don't like pink.
So it wasn't a vote for tie-dye. It was a vote against pink. I see how it is. Makes me sad. No, I got very excited. I hit 500 downloads of my podcast. And so I actually am considering buying another set of dice to have more variety. But then I'm like, you already have two choices. You're going to make it more complicated. I'm like, but sparkly dice.
Sparkly dice? Don't underestimate the impact of sparkly dice.
I love dice. I mean, I need the dice. Are you tempting me to more dice, Jane?
Yes. There's no harm in owning more dice.
All right, let's see. Well, and this doesn't include the 2 sets of D6s I have as well.
Only 2 sets of D6s. I mean, no, my husband has a bag. It's a Crown Royal bag that is full to the top with dice. Yeah, go right ahead and buy more dice because someone's going
to celebrate 500 downloads. But I got to have a bona fide reason here. Come on.
501
right, let's see what we get.
You could also, and 502 and 503.
I think I'll wait till I hit 1,000 to get another set. All right. So we have number 8. What is your favorite place to read?
Okay, if I could just choose out of the entire world, I have not been back there for 25 years, but there's the Andrew Dixon White Library in Cornell University is a library inside the Uris undergraduate library, and it's got wrought iron, and it has these little desks in the nooks, and you're like surrounded by books, and you can go up 3 stories of, because the stacks are one on top of the other, and it's all wrought iron, and it's beautiful, and there's these green lamps, and it's beautiful. I would read there any day of the week.
All right. Now that sounds inspirational.
It is awesome.
We have 12. Would you take a trip to Antarctica?
Yes, but I would need somebody to tell me what to do.
Well, me and Karina Fabian, we want to go. And so we're thinking of taking a cruise. We should take you along. We'll go on a Catholic Writers Guild cruise to Antarctica.
Okay, make it so it's tax deductible and we can go. All of us should write books about Antarctica afterwards, or maybe we could all just get together and write an anthology and make it tax deductible. And then go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so we can plan this in July.
Sounds
good. We're on it. Okay, we'll have a powwow. 41.
So your dice are skewing a little low there.
No, 41's not low.
But I mean, you didn't have. I mean, you 8, 12, and 41. You don't have anything in the upper end of the.
That's okay. That's why it's the rando round, not the evenly distributed round.
We dice shame in my house, though. If dice are skewing low, we will scold them. We'll put them on pieces of paper, and we will dice shame them and take pictures and post them. These dice refuse to roll. This dice rolls 7 in a row. 7? 8 times in a row while we were playing, Settlers of Catan.
Oh
Yes, we'll do
no.
things like that.
So the thief was just stealing
Everything,
everything. Oh
these
my.
dice refuse to roll 6s. They rolled lots of 5s and lots of 8s, but no 6s, so we'll dice shame. Anyway, go on.
Mm.
So you said 41. Question 41.
What makes you
Oh,
smile?
puns. Cinnamon rolls.
You have puns and buns. What more do you want?
Good music. Finishing races. Yeah.
Awesome. And I did read that you're working on training for your second
Yeah,
marathon.
I just did the New York City half marathon, and that was tough. But now I'm going to train for the Chicago marathon, and I'm running with with an order of nuns. Basically, there's a nun who's a 3-hour marathoner, and she literally runs the team, but she also runs the marathon. And so I'm going to have to fundraise and then run 26 miles for the convent.
I don't know if she still runs, but here in Spokane, there was a religious sister, and I think she was actually an ultra marathoner, but she might have just been a marathoner, but I can't remember her name. But yeah, really famous
Wow.
sister from Spokane who was hardcore long distance runner. All right. Well, this time has flown by, and it's time for me to ask you the last question I ask all of my guests, which is, what gives you hope right now?
What gives me hope? That's a good question.
That's why I use it over and over.
I'm because I see improvements in the world, little things that improve over time. And I don't, hope doesn't need a lot to sustain it. I think seeing people becoming better people, seeing people work hard to overcome the issues that they're facing, seeing people grow from just the hard knocks life's thrown at them. That I think is where I find hope most of the time, is in the little progresses that we have around us, and that that there's healing that takes place, even if it's just micro healing, and all of those things are what give me hope.
That's awesome. Even the small progresses are progresses.
Especially the small progresses, because a lot of them are very hard fought and hard won. And when you see those, you know that there are still good things happening.
Amen. Thank you so much for joining me for Jane Squared.
Yes, thank you for having me on.
If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, click on the follow button for more tales every other Tuesday. And in the meantime, read stories that matter because you are living one.